Yeah, I think we are all set to record. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, our lovely panelists, as well as our attendees. Um, I want to welcome you all to our fourth webinar. It's SDG 16, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions. My name is Mina Baliagic, and I'm happy to guide today's discussion on how we, across diverse roles and sectors, can drive progress towards a more just, inclusive, and sustainable world. Our session will explore the vital importance of building strong institutions and fostering peace, reflecting on the diverse experience of our esteemed panelists. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. The session will be recorded, as you've seen, for those who cannot attend, and it will be put on our corporate website, so you can go back and view it again, or you can distribute it to your friends, family, staff, students, wider community, whoever you think might be interested. Please keep your questions separate from the main chat, and feel free to sign in early for future sessions to minimize any technical issues, just our panelists have done. So SDG 16 is integral to creating societies where justice and strong institutions uphold human rights, equality, and peaceful living. Today's discussion will delve into strategies, challenges, and innovations that can contribute to achieving this goal. So without further ado, our lovely panelists, would you like to briefly introduce yourselves? We can start with Suki, if that's okay. Hi, Suki.
Hi, Mina. Hello, everybody. I'm Suki. I'm the Director of Programmes for Policing at Middlesex University. In summary, I lead the development of the training that we do. I want to say innovative training, actually, that we do for our new recruit police officers. Ensuring that they are equipped to uphold justice, human rights, and community trust. So I think my role directly supports the SDG 16 in terms of, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Because, I work to ensure that we are embedding fairness and accountability and inclusivity into that police education space. And we work closely with police forces and, community stakeholders. In doing that, committed to shaping a police profession that fosters a trust and promotes equity and builds safer, stronger communities. Previously, I was a police sergeant in the Met Police, and I held various roles. My favourite one was in community policing, actually, and the last one I did was serving in the Diplomatic Protection Command for the Met.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Suki. Peter, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Mina. Hello, everyone. My name's Peter. I'm a Professor of International Relations. I've been at Middlesex for an awfully long time. I teach primarily in the area of international relations, on the MA International Relations in particular. Writing interests include global environmental politics, human security, and the politics of the Arctic.
Thank you very much. Fru, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Fru Ndemeno-Tegomoh. I'm a current PhD candidate in Middlesex and a somewhat recent LLM graduate from Middlesex. My research is on the legal right to self-determination in the context of the Anglophone crisis in Cameroon, as seen through a 12 perspective, which I may get into a little bit. Previously, I done placements at Citizens UK, which informs a lot of my remarks today. Citizens UK, and prior to that, I worked a bit in the private sector during my JD at Pace University, working at Newman Farrar's Civil Rights Law Division, and then before that, I was at the Permanent Mission of the IUCN to the United Nations. So did some work in the diplomacy sphere with relation to nature conservation. Very happy to join you all.
Thank you so much for being here. And Philip.
Thank you, Mina. Hi, everyone. My name is Philip Leach. I'm a Professor of Human Rights Law at Middlesex, and I'm also a human rights practitioner. And in the law school here at Middlesex, we have a Human Rights Centre, the European Human Rights Advocacy Centre. ERAC is the acronym. And the ERAC is involved in human rights practice, in litigation, in representing victims of human rights violations and members of their family, primarily from the sort of former Soviet area of Europe. So countries like Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Georgia, that's in the news at the moment. And I'll be saying a little bit more about the work of that centre a little bit later. Thanks, Mina.
Thank you so much, Philip. Welcome, everyone. Again, it's lovely to have you here. If it's okay, Peter, I'd like to start with a question for you. Thank you very much. How effective are current international legal frameworks in promoting and protecting human rights, particularly in conflict zones?
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mina. Well, I think people often paint a negative picture, and we always look at the failings of human rights law and war law. And there are, many failings. Let's be honest about that. But I think it's important to see this in the longer term perspective. So in terms, human rights law is sporadically effective. I think it's fair to say. But I would also say that it is nevertheless progressing slowly. And I think we always have to look at it as very much in the long term. So with the International Criminal Court, for example, it's clearly, far from perfect in what it does. It's not universal in its membership. Many countries are not involved. It's been somewhat partial in its case law up until now, focusing primarily or almost exclusively on Africa. But nevertheless, it's a relatively new body. If we look at its work, it has imprisoned presidents and war criminals. The recent decision to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu, his defense minister and the head of Hamas, show that it's prepared to show its teeth as well. So, that's addressing those issues of a lack of universality and partiality. And I think it's indicative again of, the sort of slow progress. In terms of war zones, kind of more specifically, again, it's a sporadic picture. But again, I think if you look at progress, you can see growth. I mean, for instance, recently I've been working on a piece on pillage in war, and I've been kind of reassured in many ways that this is an area which is today pretty well addressed. There have been quite a number of successful prosecutions on the basis of pillage. There's a fairly clear understanding that thieving in wartime, which, just to be clear, is what pillage is illegal. And inevitably some ambiguities exist, but we can see a sort of case law building from Nuremberg through to recent ICC cases. We can see it in how ecocide is gradually kind of emerging, and the move to sort of criminalize that. So yeah, in short, clearly legal frameworks and their ability to enforce human rights are sporadic, but I do believe there is progress, and that's something we shouldn't lose sight of.
And do you believe that there will be further and hopefully more recent developments in ecocide? Because there is more emphasis placed on other things when it comes to conflict and war, but ecocide is predominantly growing at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think awareness has grown. You can see it in how it's certainly grown in domestic legislation. I saw recently in Spain that there was an important test case which is now established. That's not military ecocide, but ecocide in a sort of industrial sense. I was recently in touch with the Environment Ministry in Ukraine when I was researching a piece on ecocide, and I was quite impressed with a detailed inventory they're putting together. They're very carefully and systematically chronicling all cases of ecocide, such as dam buster raids that the Russians have been carrying out in real detail and with independent scientific analysis. With the hope that one day this could be used as a basis for prosecuting Russia. And I know a lot of people will look at that, well, that'll never happen, will it? But who knows? Who knows what might happen? And in the future, that could become a very valuable resource. So I think there's a public, if you like, global public appetite for criminalizing environmental damage. And again, it's one of those things which I think, like I was saying with pillage, I think there is enough of a sort of consensus behind that, even though there are ambiguities about, how far can you go in terms of what's a legitimate amount of environmental damage, in the same ways with, collateral damage of people in war. I think things are progressing, and, I would imagine eventually we will see a kind of workable doctrine of ecocide, which will, hopefully gradually grow and grow.
Yeah, well, looking forward to following on that. Thank you so much. Philip, it's okay Yeah, thank you. What strategies have proven most effective in advocating for human rights and strengthening institutions in Europe?
Well, I think the most important institution we have in human rights terms in Europe is the Council of Europe, set up just in the aftermath of the Second World War. So what now, 75, 80 years old, and was set up, following global conflict, terrible suffering, terrible human rights violations, and was set up also to try to help European states to come together. There are now 46 countries, including the UK. So this is the Council of Europe is entirely separate from the European Union. So I'm very pleased to say we're still in the UK, still a member of the Council of Europe, 46 states. And I think the most important institution that the Council of Europe has set up is the European Court of Human Rights. And it's a body that it is possible for anyone in any of those 46 states to challenge human rights violations before the court. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a centre in the law school here, which has been for more than 20 years, has been bringing cases on behalf of victims in countries like Georgia and Ukraine, as I mentioned earlier. And allied to that, in terms of the law, we have the Council of Europe created a treaty called the European Convention on Human Rights, which has been fundamental and is, again, for those of us in the UK, was brought into the law through the Human Rights Act about 25 years ago. And that's been fundamental in changing culture, changing perceptions, changing culture of public authorities and those who work for public authorities in terms of the positive obligations to respect human rights. And I think so that I think coming down into the nitty-gritty a little bit, I mean, the sort of thing that Suki in her policing course will have to deal with, the positive obligations on the police to protect us, which is fundamental to what they do. That is underscored by the European Convention on Human Rights.
Thank you. Fru, to kind of expand, how do you see the landscape of human rights and strong institutions evolving over the next decade? And what role will the next generation of lawyers play in its evolution?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think to come to the last part first, I think there are two main areas that I can speak to from my own personal experience. So again, my most recent background has been in community organizing, as well as my role in academia and research. So I think young people, young legal professionals, students can play a role in advocacy and awareness. We can organize workshops, seminars such as these, and campaigns to raise awareness about the importance of and relevant issues related to peace, justice, and strong institutions. I think we also have the advantage of being able to leverage digital platforms, such as social media and other digital tools to spread information, counter information, and promote dialogues related to these issues. So I know social media is typically seen as maybe not a force for good in the world typically, but we do have the opportunity to use it in that way. And I think through doing this, we can engage in movements, particularly grassroots movements that we can participate in or start to demand things like accountability, transparency, and justice in governance. So with my work in Citizens UK in particular, this is some of the work that we did. So for anyone who's not familiar, Citizens UK is an alliance of organizations that tries to create social change through community organizing, which is a process that brings people together to win change on issues that concern them in their communities. So during my LLM, I spent some time working with the North London chapter of Citizens UK. I worked on a couple different issues. One was their living wage campaign, and another was the refugee rights campaign. And through that campaign, we engaged in listening sessions where we spoke to people being, refugees and asylum seekers being housed in hotels in North London. some of the issues that they were facing. And through grassroots organizing, we were able to win change on issues such as getting them better food in the hotels, better food they were being served. The food they were being served was pretty awful. And also, I think we just won a campaign on free busing for asylum seekers, which we're really proud about. And then I think coming to the next point would be academia and research. So I think through conducting research on issues related to peace, justice, and strong institutions, we can inform policies and maybe new frameworks for addressing relevant issues. So for my own research, I'm again looking at the legal right to self-determination in the context of the Anglophone region of Cameroon. And my research hopes to draw insights from TWAIL scholarship, which TWAIL is Third World Approaches to International Law. And I think, trying to address these issues through, new lenses such as, TWAIL scholarship gives us the opportunity through our research and our academia to assist in these goals.
It's really interesting how you've gone through the academia, but also social media within the advocacy kind of parameter, because we've all seen a lot of the news that have been coming out of conflict zones currently are reaching people through social media. So social media is playing more and more bigger roles within advocacy, but also letting people know what's actually happening, that change is needed. So thank you for that. Suki, just to kind of, because we've spoken about advocacy, we've spoken about legality, just to bring policing into it, what are the key components of training programs that prepare law enforcement officers to uphold justice and human rights?
For me.
Yeah.
Oh, for Suki, sorry.
No, classic. Someone has to do that role. So that was me. No, just going back to Fru's point around, research. I think we're in a position where police education today has to integrate the theoretical knowledge with the practical skills, so that we're ensuring that the justice and human rights piece is daily practice for our officers. So, across the program, fundamentally for us is where we build the legal and ethical foundations for our learners. So going back to the Human Rights Act and extending that to the Code of Ethics and ensuring they've got good decision making frameworks. So making that core and foundational for them, so that in all of the things that they're doing, these are basic considerations for them in their decision making process when dealing with each other and the public. I think a really challenging bit is around cultural competency and and bias awareness. So ensuring that our training addresses that unconscious bias that does happen, and we're ensuring that we're fostering this cultural awareness, I think is super critical in today's world. Lots of research obviously demonstrates that training improves the decision making and reduces disparities in the responses to different groups, the marginalized groups across us. So I think that's really important. I think also more towards the practical elements is the scenario-based training. So allowing scenarios and simulations where students can actually think about, or police officers can think about, how you'd ethically handle complex scenarios, such as de-escalating a hate crime incident, for example, or responding to a domestic abuse situation. And again, for us in our programs, we give them the opportunity to have to complete research projects that are evidence-based. So, so many things come out of it: violence against women, domestic abuse, how we treat Black and minority ethnic communities, how police, institutions can develop, and we've got this lovely repository of it. So I think those are the four main areas. But I think something that we really embed in the programs now is this concept of restorative justice, ensuring that they know how it's weaved across, and how organizations, their police forces, can have a huge impact on ensuring that, organizationally and individually, they're promoting community healing, and leading into that victim offender mediation reduction. So yeah, I think for us, those are the most important things in terms of training programs for our police officers.
It's interesting that you've mentioned real life kind of examples that they work with, because England itself, but London especially, is such a massive cultural pot. We have people from everywhere, and you can see how conflicts abroad can actually have repercussions internally. So I do believe what you're saying, it's very important for active police members, but also students, to have that knowledge of cultural sensitivity in order to perform their job more wholly, almost.
Yeah, and I think police are, you know, if you're going back to the Pelian principles, they are the public, so they have an impact outside of their policing organisations too. They are instruments of education beyond, you know, just the public that they deal with. So we put that point to them very early on, and that becomes very culturally embedded, and they also enact and create change across their organisations, which, as you know, is very difficult to change across the piece.
Thank you for that. Well, we've spoken about how it is domestically to, you know, uphold peace. But Peter, a question for you. What are the main challenges in enforcing international human rights law, and how can they be addressed?
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, as you say, you know, we can compare that to domestic, but in a way we shouldn't make the distinction. The key way of which, because international human rights law can be enforced, is through states. And so we always need to come back to the point that countries themselves need to engage with and respect international human rights law. And I think that's absolutely central. I mean, for instance, to go back to the point I made earlier about, you know, the ICC arrest warrant with Netanyahu, I've been quite dismayed to see how it's sort of being debated, it would appear, between countries as to whether they will respect that or not. I mean, it's like, well, you know, if the police come to your house and, you know, suggest they want to arrest someone, you don't enter into negotiations with the police. You know, it's a legal matters have to take their course. So yeah, so, you know, countries need to take the ICC seriously. Any ICC member should automatically, you know, do as is required in that particular instance. Similarly, with something like the European Court of Human Rights, which Philip talked about, you know, it's the talk that we've had in this country from some in the Conservative Party about withdrawing from that is just a truly appalling notion in my way of thinking. I mean, even if we accept the premise that the convention would be replaced with a British Human Rights Act of some form, that's kind of missing the point. You know, the kind of message that would send out internationally is one where, you know, rights are just understood as purely flowing from domestic law, which of course is negating in many ways the whole sort of point of what human rights are. Human rights exist as an entity on the basis that, you know, we ultimately don't trust governments to fully be you know, respecting them at all times, and that there is a need to go beyond domestic law. So yeah, the key in that sense is states, but of course there are other means open to enforcement as well. If we look at it on an international level, pressure groups, of course, play an important role, and that's one that we can see growing. You know, Fru mentioned, you know, social media. I mean, that, you know, those kinds of channels are very effective in the whole process, of course, of naming and shaming, increasing awareness, countering disinformation. So civil society has a strong role to play, and that's one that's obviously already very much out there. If we think about the work of, you know, Transparency International or Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and many other groups within the UN system. Again, you know, people often point to limitations and failures, but if you look at the Human Rights Council, it's you know, it's been the subject of criticism as to which countries have been, you know, able to participate in it. But actually, over time, through its, you know, universal periodic review, I think it has contributed pretty effectively to the naming and shaming process. Obviously, some countries are beyond shame, but most countries, you know, don't like the idea of being embarrassed in, you know, in the international public spotlight. And there's plenty of good research to show that, you know, countries have, even reluctantly sometimes, sort of amended legislation to avoid, you know, the humiliation of being sort of brought to task by the HRC. So yeah, there are means of enforcement that exist in international politics and international law, but ultimately, of course, I think that the main thing is it comes down to states engaging properly with the process.
Thank you. And Philip, just kind of connecting to what Peter said with regards to states making sure to uphold international laws, how important do you think is the collaboration between the governmental, like states, and non-governmental organizations in achieving the targets specifically of SDG 16?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I think, as Peter said, states hold the ring in all these things. They are in control, and the various institutions that we've mentioned, the ICC, the European Court, the UN, bodies at the UN are effectively set up and controlled by states. And we need to engage as civil society in so many different ways. I think fundamentally, as I think we've all said, education about these systems so that we know as students, as people who are going on to join civil society, that we understand how they work. When I teach human rights students, if we talk about, I don't know, Israel and Gaza, we talk about Ukraine and Russia, they are utterly appalled. And I take strength from that because they're right to be utterly appalled. On the other hand, I also try and give a message, as Peter did earlier, that the systems we have are deeply flawed, but they're what we have, and there are some strong elements to them, and we need to make them work. And so I think the core, my core answer to your question was, as civil society, we need to engage with governments to make these systems work better, because they are what we have. And there are some, despite the great troubles we see globally at the moment, there are some very bright, good, strong stories that we have to hold on to. And the more that we're aware of that, and we get everyone to participate, and we shout out when governments, supposedly in our name, decry and denounce these institutions, we need to resist and point out that they're wrong about that.
Yeah, and again, coming back to Fru's point, I think social media has played a massive role in kind of making sure people around the world are aware of what governments are doing, and all the civil societies that are trying to, push for justice and to stop the conflict that is currently ongoing. Fru, what role do young legal professionals and students have in promoting SDG 16?
Sorry, I lost you for a moment.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I think, I spoke to it a little bit with regard to advocacy and awareness and then engaging in social movements and through academia and research. But I think going beyond that, I've seen efforts related to like innovation and technology. So designing applications or platforms that increase access to justice, improve government accountability, and enhance citizen participation, whether that be through using mobile and digital tools to report instances of human rights abuses, which we've seen, I know, particularly relating to the most recent conflict in Israel and Palestine. Many people are seeing this essentially like live streamed to their phones. I think volunteering and civic engagement is very important. Volunteering your time, or even pro bono work through partnering with NGOs gives young people those sorts of opportunities. For myself personally, I actually was engaged in the clinic at Iraq with Professor Leach, and so I won't step on his toes too much. He can speak a lot more to the work that they did there than I can. But I think I think having a university like Middlesex, which facilitates these partnerships for young people to partner with international organizations or NGOs working in international organizations on projects related to peace and justice is also really, really great opportunity. Beyond that, I mean, there are global youth networks that people can participate in. we're seeing a lot of that with these solidarity movements with the Palestinian people, and that gives people the opportunity to share knowledge and strategies for peace building and justice. Yeah.
Something you did mention, the work with students here with Iraq. I think students at Middlesex, but also staff, are very lucky to have access to such a great organization, but also to see real cases and speak to the people that actively work within it. Suki, connecting to that, with regards to our policing apprenticeship program, how do we measure the impact of those programs on peace and justice within our communities? So I think you're muted.
This is a really interesting area. I think it's quite a challenging area to look at. I think for us, initially, we've got such great personal narratives that come to us, you know, when they're speaking to how the program transforms their perceptions and also their practice. Examples being, you know, that they might reference, for example, that they're less likely to get into physical conflict with people that they're dealing with in public, because they're more they use and apply their communication and conflict resolution skills that they've picked up, not just in practice, but also the theoretical. So we have all of these personal collections and narratives, which piece of work that we're looking to do in the new year is bringing those together and formalizing some of that, so we can create an evidence base about how these programs are impacting, you know, the societies that they're being implemented within. I think also some metrics that help us will again, a difficult areas like crime data analysis, and being able to look at reductions in violent crime or antisocial behaviour, specifically where we have a lot of those students. I think one of our officers did a piece recently, and he did a piece on, since the PCDA, so this is the apprenticeship program that became mandatory, and the DHEP, the degree holders entry program, since those programs were launched, and this was during a time of COVID, what has the picture looked like for their local force, so Surrey, and they found significant reductions in crime, specifically in areas where there were lots more entrants of these types, so these police recruits. So we do have some data there. There's just lots of complexity around measuring impact, but I think there's a lot of independent research that we're aspiring to do now, looking at the longitudinal study. So we do have a couple of new cohorts that are coming into the fray now, where we're looking at actually how do we measure, for example, baseline attitudes towards things like social justice, things like police, and what's expected of those, and tracking those longitudinally and seeing how they change, how their perceptions change over time. I think also things that we can look at is the crime survey for England and Wales, for example, to capture that trust and public perception, because we have had a huge wave of these type of entrants. So officers mandatory required to take degrees and exercise their brains in far more ways than they had done traditionally. You know, looking at that picture and seeing, well, what are the, you know, outcomes in society? Do we see reductions in charging? Are we seeing increased, you know, convictions in areas where we've put a lot of work into, say, for example, case file management, you know, understanding the law around that and the complexity, the requirements of them to build really, you know, detailed case files. So all these kind of things feed into a broader picture. Mainly, I think in measuring impact with metrics is quite challenging, but I think being able to definitely collect those personal narratives and looking to some of the crime data and the crime survey as well for perception and experience of crime, I think that those are some steps that we can certainly take to measuring impact.
And I think it's also very important and very positive that we have the police consortium within Middlesex that can kind of feed more data, because it does encompass multiple police forces and multiple universities and, well, massive cohorts, you know, for future data collection, but also for future generation of apprenticeship students. Thank you. And now to kind of go into a more personalized kind of, for your own work, your own research, Peter, just to check, the region of the Arctic is a critical area in combating climate change. How essential is it that we get the governance right in the management of the northern region of our planet?
Yeah, interesting question. Well, yes, to start with, you're absolutely right. The Arctic is very much central to thinking about climate change, although the whole world is being affected in disparate ways. The Arctic is warming at a much more rapid rate than the rest of the world, and it's experiencing very significant transformations, which have all kinds of knock-on effects. I haven't really got time to sort of get into this, but the kind of social implications of that have been quite profound and quite depressing in many ways. I mean, well, quite literally, there's been the highest suicide rates, for example, are amongst indigenous peoples in the Arctic because of the social disruption to their lifestyles that have arisen out of this. So the Arctic is very profoundly affected. And so to get to the sort of second part of your question, the governance side of it, yes, is of course key. And this is one area where, unfortunately, we are seeing another sort of sad side effect of the Russo-Ukraine war, because that's led to an effective paralysis of the Arctic Council, which is the main intergovernmental body which has been responsible for political governance in the region. And that's a body which had done very significant good work. Firstly, in terms of promoting peace amongst the members, because you have to bear in mind the members include, of course, the US and Russia, but it's also done a lot in terms of bringing them together in terms of climate change. And again, you have to bear in mind the US and Russia in particular are two countries with a fairly poor track record on addressing climate change. So it's been foremost in advancing environmental and scientific research as well. So the effective stalling of that, the Arctic Council hasn't technically ceased to exist, but the fact, obviously, the other countries, the US, Canada, Norway, etc., not engaging with Russia, is having already knock-on effects. For example, work on maritime safety, which had been quite important in the area because it's getting a lot more shipping and a lot more oil prospecting and things of that nature. It now appears to be sort of unlikely to be developed further. So yeah, governance is very important for the Arctic itself, but of course also for the wider question of climate change, for the world over.
It is interesting to see how everything's sort of interconnected, because obviously, even though there's a conflict, well, massive conflicts happening all over the globe, they are kind of impacting developments with regards to environment, with protecting the Arctic and many other spheres. So it's very interesting to kind of see that. Philip, kind of an example, if you might, whether from your own work or from the wider work of ERAC potentially, can you provide an example in which getting a human rights situation wrong has led to a negative consequence towards the environment?
That's a really important question, and it's in some ways it's been a difficult one for the human rights world, the human rights systems, because I mean, if you look at the European Convention on Human Rights, for example, there's no mention in that convention of the right to health, let alone any kind of environmental rights. So I remember some years ago at ERAC, we had an environmental case against Russia about pollution from a steel plant, and we were able to argue that one of the rights in the convention, the right to private and family life, was affected by pollution, and we were able to win that case. And moving forward to this year, of course, the most dramatic case, the dramatic issue in this year in the European context has been the climate litigation, the climate emergency litigation, and there's a particularly the leading case is a case against Switzerland. It was brought by an association of older women in Switzerland who are concerned about the environment, about the climate emergency. So there you have the civil society engagement. It was brought by this association, and they were critical of, in this case, the Swiss authorities for failing to meet their targets of greenhouse gas emissions, and they tried to argue that in the Swiss courts, and they failed. So there was a fundamental access to justice issue. They weren't taken seriously. And at the European Court found that there was a violation of this right to private and family life because of the failure of the Swiss authorities to engage properly with their positive obligations and, as I say, limit the greenhouse gas emissions in particular. So it's a moving, it's a hugely important area, and it's a moving area in terms of human rights. Human rights is gradually catching up, and I think what's interesting, as with many issues of change, it's very rare that one case will change everything. It's very, very rare that happens. What usually happens is that there's a case that leads, and then other cases that will follow, that will keep opening the door. So there are indeed a lot of other cases in the pipeline that will, I think, push the door further open to make sure that our governments comply with the obligations that they've signed up to at Paris and in other conventions to meet greenhouse gas emission limitations.
What are the challenges in bringing such a case to court?
Well, there's lots of a lot of them. Perhaps I'll just mention one really difficult one in terms of human rights is the issue of jurisdiction and whether states can be found to be responsible where they do something that has effects in another country, and that's you were talking to Peter about armed conflict. Well, so that's an aspect of that. When one state bombs another state, people may be surprised to know that actually that may not engage their human rights obligations, and in some ways that's pretty shocking. But that's the law that we have. Of course, it also applies in the climate context. If somebody in country A, say, says that the next door neighbor, country B, is polluting and damaging my health, is that other country responsible? And in human rights terms, in terms of jurisdiction, it's not clear yet. It's not been decided. So there's still, there are still these battles are still to be won. For Iraq, we've had a lot of cases where there's been a cross-border, states shelling or using aircraft to shell over the border, and we've tried to push that point, but it's a difficult one. So that would be just one. And it's a huge problem, but one of the problems in bringing this kind of casework.
Indeed, thank you. We have a couple of questions from the attendees. Suki, would you be okay to take the first one? So we have a question from Jackie, I believe. Thinking about the future, such as increased technological advancement, robotics, use of AI in everyday life, etc., how do we create collaborations to police and/or ensure citizens retain their human rights?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Something that's actually hot off the press for us, and something that we're looking to feed into a lot more. I think, we're talking about this multi-stakeholder collaboration, and I think first and foremost, it's this ethical governance around this. So I think, developing or creating ethical advisory boards that include police forces, technology developers, the human rights advocates, academics, and also those core community representatives, help to evaluate the human rights implications of some of these new technologies and are able to feed into the wider, discussion about this in change. Secondly, developing regulatory frameworks, not as easy, but for the deployment of AI and robotics in law enforcement, so in UK policing, ensures that there's, to ensure that we'll have alignment with the Human Rights Act and international standards like the UN Guiding Principles on business and human rights. I think for us also fostering that international collaboration, like Philip was speaking about, gas house emissions affecting one country to another. It's the same thing in this space as well. So sharing those best practices from global perspectives and through global initiatives, which emphasize ethical AI use. And I think The UK Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, CDEIA, work closely with policing institutions, such as the two that we work with at the moment, to ensure that data-driven technologies are implemented transparently and responsibly. So, you know, a good example of this, again, a paper that a student of ours recently wrote was, how do we balance, you know, so you've got this domestic violence protection order, how do we balance the intrusion? So the forces are now starting to be able to look at data and looking at patterns of suspects and thinking perhaps those potential individuals could become offenders. So how do you balance that intrusion, that invasion of individual public, individual personal information with keeping women safe, or keeping victims of domestic violence safe? Things like Notting Hill Carnival, where we have a range of detection, facial awareness detection, where police are able to go proactively and stop and search people based on markers that come out through this. That we know through evidence that that's helped to create a less hostile Notting Hill environment, or help to prevent some crimes in there. But it's a hard one for police to kind of speak to, because they hold such huge reams of data. I think the biggest thing is around the transparency and accountability tech deployment. So ensuring that the impact assessments are published. So every time they're using a new technology, they're articulating, what the implications for privacy are, the discrimination and the human rights element that might be breached, and how they might mitigate some of those things or preserve the human right. How they might engage the public, through consultation and citizen review panels, or, IAGs in advisory groups, to create space for those communities to voice those concerns, those valid concerns, and shape how technologies are used. And I think, again, going back to police training, which is my forte, it's ensuring that we're embedding this technology, the rights element of the technology, so that our police officers are understanding the capabilities and the limitations of these advanced technologies. And that is, one of those things that we've interwoven into our curriculum, specifically to the later stages of their kind of specialist route. And these things include technology ethics. What do our training programs look like? In terms of data privacy, surveillance, algorithms? How do we ensure that our learners are learning these sophisticated concepts that they can apply when they're out there on the ground, or feeding into some of the dialogue that's really rich and out there? Again, we're lucky that we collaborate with 3 other universities and across 4 different forces. Now we can develop these specialized modules to train officers to look at the fairness and legality of these technological tools. So yeah, for us, it's important that training also feeds back into, so back to Jackie's question, ensuring that the citizens are retaining their human rights, is being really open and transparent about all of these initiatives, about the police training, so how we're approaching that and how forces are approaching that, and ensuring that is made as public as any new initiative to deploy AI or robotics in society. And I mean, I could go on this subject for ages, but I think I'll stop there. I think Sarah's put in a comment in the chat as well, who I work closely with.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, because again, technology keeps changing rapidly, almost day to day, and it's interesting to have that almost a living organism within education, where you have to play catch up, but also kind of anticipate of what new technology might have impact on lives as it comes. So it's fascinating. We could talk about it for a long time. Unfortunately, we do have a time limit today, but a couple more questions from the attendees. Fru, if you're okay to take a question on social media, if that's all right. Lisette asked, there has been a couple of mentions of the use of social media and the use of this to promote misinformation, which can incite hate and conflict and downplay the effects of climate change, amongst many other things. Do you think that the social media companies have more of a duty to prevent this misinformation, and what more could we all do to help?
Yeah, I mean, I think any person or any company that has such an outsized impact on our day-to-day lives should have a larger duty of care. I'm no expert on this realm, so I'll defer to somebody else in terms of recommendations as far as what we could do to address the negative impacts. Personal opinion, yeah, I absolutely do believe they do.
And another question, Peter, if you'd like to try and answer it. Alice Donald asked, a climate-related litigation against states and corporations is on the rise. How effective might this be as a tool to combat greenhouse gas emissions compared to other political or diplomatic tools? Philip, also, you can both answer it if that's okay with you.
Yeah, well, my sort of instinctive feeling is extremely significant. I think there's already enough evidence to suggest that these cases are making an impact. We can see, of course, perhaps most notably in the Netherlands, where the government got itself in sort of quite a pickle, shall we say, in terms of not appearing to sort of fulfill its commitments and some of the legal challenges that have been made. But even in perhaps what we might think of the less promising situations in Pakistan, for example, cases have been brought on this basis as well. So yeah, I mean, I think this is an extremely sort of promising avenue, and I suppose the only potential negative might be governments might learn from this and be much more cautious in the future in terms of what they make commitments to, even in a fairly sort of generalized manner in terms of sort of principles like, trying to avoid getting to 1.5-degree raise in temperature. But I think as it stands, I think this is, I think there's a lot of potential here for advancing, policy and efforts to actually implement, what countries have agreed to.
Mina, I can add to that, Mina. As someone involved in human rights litigation, it might be a little bit surprising. I'd start by saying I see the limitations of litigation, and I've talked a little bit about some of the cases we've done, but I think, of course, they do have litigation, they do have limitations, and I would always see sort of cases as just being one of the levers, but it can be very significant. We've got so for those of us involved in human rights litigation, we've got to be aware of the wider context. If we're representing communities, it's got to be community led, and we've got to be aware of the importance of communicating what the litigation is about, what the issues are, and and also how you sort of implement them in practice. So I think there are limitations, but having said that, I do agree with Peter that I think it can be a hugely significant tool. The thing about cases is that they have a cutting edge. That it's about enforcing the law. And as Peter mentioned, this significant case in the Netherlands that Peter mentioned, it may be that we'll see at national level cases are on the climate emergency are more effective. They have a cutting edge. They're about applying domestic law first and foremost, and they will have to be implemented. And then finally, I'll just reiterate something I said earlier. It's not going to be one case that makes the change. It's going to be building a movement, building and learning from everyone else, other countries, from the international context, so that we can combat the climate emergency in the best way possible. Thanks.
Thank you. I am a bit concerned that we are slightly almost done with our allocated time today. So as a closing, I do have a quick question to all the panelists. In just one sentence, what is the one key action that everyone, whether it's educators, students, policymakers, can take today to support the achievement of SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions? Anyone can start.
Well, if I could start, then
Yeah,
I would say, in line with what I think I and others have spoken about, I think the key is ultimately just spreading the word that international organizations and international law are overwhelmingly good things, and that the rule of international law should be respected in the same way as most of us, acknowledge the rule of law should apply in domestic affairs, although that's increasingly doubtful in certain countries as well. So I think, public awareness and political awareness that these are important things that should be respected.
Thank you, Peter.
Mina, I think my sentence would be similarly, engage with the human rights systems fully and in good faith.
Thank you so much. Suki, Fru, whoever would like to go first.
Yeah, I mean, it was said before, but yeah, spreading awareness. I think people could share this video very widely. I think there's some. I've learned quite a bit from it. I'm sure many others would. So I think what you're doing here is a really good step forward. And I think yeah, more conversations like this, more panels like this, and people actually taking something away from it and implementing it into their own teaching, into their own work, whether it be in litigation, whether it be in grassroots community organizing. But yeah, I think just learning more and teaching more.
Happy to hear. Thank you so much. Suki?
Yeah, I'm exactly what everybody said in this group, and I think I could summarize it with the word engagement. So engaging in the community dialogue or these forums to share ideas. I'm certainly inspired now. As a key action for me is to look at how I blend and implement some of this that we've discussed today, the SDG 16, more widely across our curriculum. Yeah, so that we're sharing these ideas, we're addressing these local issues, and we're collaborating for a better world.
Thank you all so much. Really appreciate all your insights and expertise. It was lovely to see different ideas, but also different approaches, because we did have such a broad aspect of policing, but also human rights and international relations, advocacy as well. And I just want to say thank you again for attending, to all of our attendees. Apologies if some of the questions within the chat were missed. It wasn't on purpose, it's due to time restrictions. And again, the recording will be published on our corporate website. So you can go and watch it if anyone has logged in late and missed something, or if you'd just like to view this discussion again, please do spread it to students, staff, community, friends, everyone. And again, hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. And I think if anyone else has anything to say, otherwise, have a lovely day and happy holidays to everyone celebrating.
Thank you, Mina.
Thank you,
Thank you
Mina.
so much.
Bye all.
Thank you so much for
Bye.
organizing
Very
this.
much.
I'll take care.